Are going to start with a briefing from, I'm finding you on the agenda, our Citizens Compensation Advisory Committee. And they come on up to the table, everybody. They are, we might need Ben as well. Is Ben wanting to participate here, or we're okay here? Okay, good. Thanks, Ahua. Every year, this volunteer committee does some incredible work that feeds into our annual budget. And I would welcome, and I'd like you to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your responsibility and how you address that, and then we'll dive right into any report you have and then open it up for questions. Does that sound good? So, Dave, do you want to start and just introduce your committee members?
Sure. David Salazar, I'm HR Program Manager over Compensation and Classification and Job Recruitment. Corey Peterson, to my right here, is the Vice Chair of the committee. And Connie Leonardakis is the Chair of the committee. So they're both here to make this presentation to you.
Thank you very much.
All right, good evening. We're in between you and dinner, so we're going to make this as effective as we can. So our committee is made up of a mix of public and private sector human resources and compensation practitioners. So basically, we practice what we preach, and our goal is to we advise the City Council, and we create the annual report each year with best practices in industry and in public sector, and make sure that the city workers are in a very competitive pay position according to the local market that we compete in. So the formal duties of our committee is in the executive summary, but that in a nutshell is who we are. And so with us, I have my vice chair and the infamous HR department, which is really the makeup of our team. So does everyone have a copy of the annual report in front of you? Okay, so let's, like a hard copy.
I've got it on my packets.
Okay,
Our briefing packet, so.
all right. Well, so I'd like to turn your attention to bullet point 1 in the executive summary, because that's where the excitement is. We would like to share that our overall compensation philosophy is working. So a little bit of background on how we set the parameters in the analysis. So we strive for a pay position in the market that is 95% of what we call the established midpoints of the ranges that we are benchmarking, and we'll go through that a little bit more. And the market is considered the Wasatch Front, so everything from Ogden to Provo is what we compete for talent for Salt Lake City. And we do this every year by participating in an annual survey made up of 160 employers. That's both private and public sector employees. And those entities are in your Appendix B. So you'll see a makeup of two annual surveys, and one is solely public sector and one is solely private sector. So the methodology that we use is we take best practices in compensation philosophy, and that is we look at median pay rate, so not into the vernacular of compensation terms, but the median is a very important measurement because it basically throws out the outliers, and it takes a pure data set of the range of salaries. So we use that philosophy, and it's widely known by experts. World at Work is a national recognized nonprofit, global actually, that uses that methodology as well. So if I can really outline it for you in a nutshell, we take the 2,700 titles, our employees, for example, that's our population, and we funnel that down into 830 different job titles. So in one job title, you can have 340 people in it, for example. And further, we funnel that down into 56 benchmarks. So the 56 benchmarks is where we look at the annual survey and we compare ourselves to the market and say, are we at 95% or less or more in terms of what we compete for? And so those benchmarks are also in your appendices A. So that is, in the simplest terms, our philosophy. So on page 7, and that's why if your report is laid out as our book is, in the years that I have been on the committee and with the committee, this is the longest list I've seen. So on page 7, what you have is where we lead the market. And so for us, leading is where we are 10% or higher than the median of the pay rates. So when you look at this list of 23 titles, it extends from 111% above the market all the way to 140%. And as I mentioned, we took 56 benchmarks, so this is representative of almost half of the titles in the survey. So this is a good story. This is very competitive to what is out there in pay philosophies, and a very good story for us. So I'm going to pause there for just a moment and see if we're tracking along with the methodology. So our recommendation is that the City Council really do nothing in the 2017 year operating budget for these titles. Do nothing in terms of adjustments, merit, cost of living, because we're already exceeding the market. And the trajectory here is that if we keep throwing money at these titles, we're going to be way out of bounds in terms of what the salary data is telling us. So that is our recommendation. So in contrast, if we flip it the other way, if a benchmark falls below 10%, we consider that significantly lagging. So 10% and below is significantly lagging. If it's 5% below, it's slightly lagging. So if I can turn your attention to page 8, what we have there is 7 benchmarks this year that fell below those parameters. The 3 engineer, 4 plans examiner, paralegal are significantly below the market at below 90%, 87 all the way to 89%. And then as we continue, slightly below the market is 4 job titles, extending from 91% all the way to 93%. So again, our pay philosophy is to be at 95. So our recommendation with this, with these 7 job titles, would be to, as funds permit, grant special adjustments that bring these titles to the market. So in priority order, that would be those that are significantly lagging first, and those that are second, slightly lagging.
Any questions so far? I do have a question, and Dave, maybe you can help with this too. As you look at the recommendations from the committee going forward into the budget process, do they typically get just forwarded to the mayor, and then the mayor makes a determination as to whether or not to include all of these positions, for an example? And at what point do you tie a dollar amount to that, and at what point does that start to build into the budget process?
And that's exactly what happens. And so we will actually come up with a cost estimate as to what would it take to bring those employees in these jobs closer to market. And so does get factored into the mayor's budget typically. You'll see that come through as a recommendation to fund these benchmarks, either one or both of those, starting first with those that are most behind market.
And then do you typically recommend that those come up to 95%? Is that how you would make that recommendation?
Typically, what we've done is kind of as a conservative approach would be to cost out what it would cost to bring those employees to the 95% mark. In some cases, though, it might make sense for us to look at doing something more, but as a whole, that's the target that we aim for.
Any other questions?
And I'll just add to that, that really the rationale for that is because, especially where we're competing with private sector, if we're within 5%, that's really the standard that the committee has historically leaned on to say, we want to make sure our wages, they don't necessarily need to match the market or lead them, but at the very least, we don't want them to be any less than 5% below market.
Thank you. I don't know how to ask this without sounding self-serving, so I'll just assure you I'm not being self-serving. Did you do an assessment of elected officials this year? Was that a component? And I know you haven't done it every year, so that's why I'm asking. Council and mayor?
So we did not do a survey of that this year. Historically, we had been sending out a special survey to similar cities to collect that information for elected officials and department heads. We got a little pushback from the cities that were participating in that survey saying, you know, things don't really change a whole lot. Why do we need to keep doing this every year? So we opted to, rather than do that every year, probably go to every 2 to 3 years in doing that survey. So we did do a survey last year. So we have data as recent as it would have been 2015 when we would have collected that.
And David, over time, my recollection is those results varied widely. I remember at one point, elected officials were showing significantly below market, but the most recent survey showed us sort of right where we should be.
Right.
Yes. Oh, I thought you were pointing. Yes.
May I?
Yes, please.
I had the chance to meet with Andrew and Lisa and all of these folks and others earlier today and talk about this. And I think that, I mean, it's an election year, and I'll even say this, I think our council is underpaid. And this is based on not only have we not had a significant raise in a very long time, but the landscape of our work has changed significantly and in a permanent way for the foreseeable future anyway. I think that I would love to see us consider a pay raise for ourselves and have a discussion about why I feel that's justified, and maybe whether or not you do too. Because I don't think it's about comparison necessarily to other cities of the same size. It's about the intercity relations that are going on in the breadth of the issues that we are dealing with and the demands that places on our time in being able to respond and represent our constituents effectively and attend all of the meetings that are outside of even the city limits. So I just don't think that this work necessarily cross-applies very well to other cities just based on size, because the politics of this work has changed. And so it's kind of a different analysis, but I think it'd be nice to have a conversation someday about that.
Yeah, David, and if I could, and committee members, if we could get a refresher on the recommendations from last year, I think that would be helpful to see where we are. But any other evaluations that you may have pulled, and I'm not suggesting you did, I don't know if you looked at size of city versus number of constituents per district, or things that I would sort of say might be evaluation. But if you have any of that information, I think it would be very helpful.
Certainly.
To us, and we could probably figure out how to have that conversation.
And I think
Mendenhall.
I have a memory that the mayor's salary has increased more significantly than the 1.5% and 2% raises that have happened over the last few years. So that might help us get some context for the work in our city and the way that elected officials represent that time.
And so I heard you suggest too that you didn't do department heads this year.
No, we did not.
So and define department head. What anything below department heads, or was just that department head appointed position?
We actually did department heads and some division level jobs, and others that may not necessarily be division level, but that we might identify as key leadership positions. Again, I think that probably encompasses 30 or so different job titles, trying to find, again, matches for those individuals and their counterparts in other cities. So the data there, I think, is probably more helpful in trying to determine what those salaries should be, because they tend to be fall in line more. Much less so, though, with the mayor's salaries, and even less so with city council, because as you mentioned before, when we've looked at the data year in and year out, it might be up 1 year, down 1 year, and a lot of it depends on the cities that respond, and that might change somewhat from 1 year to the next, so that will have an impact on what the results will show. But I think the one thing is consistent is that you see that there's extreme variances between, not necessarily based on population size or type of government. They're just extreme differences in the pay. So I don't know that the data really helps you in deciding what your salaries should be. So I think it really does boil down to more of you having a philosophical discussion about what your pay should be for what you do.
And I think we discussed that in the history of my appointed position and David's time here, that the city council has not had a salary treatment in all those years, if I'm accurate. So
Yeah, certainly not beyond the general increase that we've given all other city employees.
I don't recall one in 8 years, other than the general increase. But I do remember having a couple conversations of 1 year being really below whatever return we got for a market comparison, and then most years being sort of right in the middle of that. So, James, did you have a question?
Yeah, mine's in regard to your survey. I noticed that, last year we received a regional survey, Seattle, Las Vegas. This year we didn't receive anything outside really the state of Utah. We were compared to South Davis, to Bountiful, to really a smaller market. And to me that really doesn't fit the capital city. When we look at our daytime population, which we know that doubles, and those populations don't double, they actually shrink. So their calls during the day are going to be a lot fewer per station than in Salt Lake City. And when we look at fire or police. So can you give me the reasoning behind that, why we left the regional study specifically on the capital city when we're talking about that type of influx in the city?
And actually, I'll just remind the council that last year we did do a special study, and that was funded. And so First West came in and made a presentation along with the presentation that the committee made, this report. And the decision was that we would not do that survey every year, but every 3 to 5 years. So the next time that we would most likely look at doing, or the soonest we would look at doing the survey again would probably be in 2018 based on that. And that was instruction that we received.
And remind us of the comparisons from last year's survey.
The special study?
Yeah.
And I assume you're talking about the public safety
Correct.
survey
Yes,
that was done.
public safety in general.
And the results from that survey, they looked at all ranks and levels of police officer, firefighters, including paramedics, up to the deputy and assistant chiefs. And depending on the positions, but the rank and file positions, we also overlaid a cost of living factor. When I say we, First West, who did the report, included that in the mix. And so once that work was done, it showed that we were much closer to being at that median point compared to those cities that we did look at. And the criteria that we used in selecting those cities included input from the union reps to decipher, size of downtown, number of calls, things like that were all factored in the mix. And that's what I would anticipate we would do again when we do the survey in 2018.
Andrew.
I want to point out one thing that was brought up, on page 10 in the report about, about gender pay equity. And I know Councilmember Mendenhall brought this up earlier, that the report highlights that they didn't see, they find that gender pay equity is in a favorable position, which is good to hear. And Councilmember Mendenhall brought up that other things we're missing. Making sure we're paying attention as much as possible to things we can't see, if that makes any sense to anyone. Because it's a difficult thing to tag. It's a difficult thing because when you look across the city, you may find discrepancies in job titles, but not within departments. And the question is, within different departments, are they treated differently? And it's a hard thing to get at. But I appreciate the effort to look at that. I appreciate the efforts that have been done so far. So thank you for following up on that.
So can we talk about how we supported our conclusions that we don't have a real problem from where we sit today.
Yes, and if you would speak to any future process that might help you, or if you found that there was something you couldn't put your hands on that might have been helpful too.
So we looked at all job titles. So pretty much that's back to the 830 job titles that we look at. And if you exclude 2/3 of that, that's the unionized workforce. And under the unionized workforce, our contracts set the terms and we're abided by those terms, and those kind of roll as dictated in the contract. What we're left with is job titles that have male incumbents only and job titles that had female incumbents only. So again, this is a point-in-time study. And then we had 163 job titles that there was a mix. So that was our sample set. So when you looked at 163 of those job titles, we found that 68 of them, women were actually making more, as much or more than men. And then in 51, they earned less. So that's the data set that we're working with. With the 51 that were making less, we did a deeper dive into more individual analysis. And what we looked at is experience, time in position, education levels, and also made sure that that was a second check. And again, we didn't really find that there's issues from where we sit today. Going forward, David, I'm going to let you speak to what the HR function is looking at. And
So in our earlier discussion today, what we did talk about was, that those factors alone may not fully justify why there would be pay differences. I know Aaron talked about differences in opportunities that might be afforded, and I'll maybe let you speak for yourself.
Can I jump in there? I think that, like Andrew, I'm really grateful that the CCAC examines this question, but I don't, so the report says that the committee speculates that the pay differences between departments are likely budget-driven and the result of differing pay philosophies, independent judgment, and discretion exercised by the various department directors. I don't think that it's I think there's a lot of complexity in everyone's decision-making, and everyone brings bias to all of our situations that we encounter as employees or as employers. And so I'm not saying it's all that simple, but I think that in this world today, we can't assume that equity is important to everyone. And we know that women are underpaid all over this country, and including right here where we sit. Women are underpaid.
More significantly in Utah than all over this country.
Yes, so we actually need to assume that there is judgment and bias against women in positions.
To Connie's point, the reason they took a closer look at the union covered job is because really the benefit to the city by having those formal pay structures in place, there is nothing that goes into figuring pay, whether you be male or female in those jobs, except for your time in the position. And so gender is not a consideration when it comes to deciding how those employees are paid one to another. So that's good news for the city. And like she said, 2/3 or more of our workforce is covered under a union contract where there is a formal wage structure in place. So it's really the non-represented employees where we need to make sure that we're keeping a close eye. And so the efforts that we're planning on making, the HR department is actively planning to provide information to departments, give them a snapshot, if you will, so that they have an idea of where their employees are with a set of guidelines that can be applied citywide, that kind of spell out, when is it appropriate to pay employees at different levels within their respective ranges. As you might expect, somebody brand new, fresh out of college, you're not gonna pay at the market rate. They haven't fully developed the talent or the competency that they need to do that job. So you're gonna pay them slightly less. That's something that I think makes sense to all of us. So giving them guidelines like that will help to make sure that we're applying that consistently citywide.
And so I think that the piece that Andrew and Aaron are referring to that I don't want to miss in this, and I can totally see legitimately how it wouldn't fall under the review of compensation, but the bias that may prevent advancement or selection or those opportunities. And do you have a mechanism in HR that helps you examine that and our ability to provide fair opportunities across gender there?
I don't know that we've had good tools in place to enable us to do that effectively, but that's certainly something that we're looking at and want to make sure that we're able to nail down. And that would include just even the recruitment processes that we have in place, the policies that we recently have revised, again, to try to provide for promotional opportunities to make those processes easier.
I
So in
really
it-
like the approach that you're taking in using the education of the way that the compensation and salaries are currently divided for the department heads to see the historic take and the breakout in a gender and probably other demographic way. I think education is always the best tool rather than saying you're all biased and your employees are suffering because of that. I don't mean to say that at all. But I think that what we don't have time to get into today would be a discussion about how where that tool maybe misses the boat in certain cases where education isn't actually going to overcome what may be true gender bias or other bias by department heads and people making those salary decisions. And where does the city, as the overall employer, have a safety net so that an entire department doesn't suffer because of that bias? And so I leave it rhetorically with you now.
Okay.
And maybe other cities or other corporations have taken that extra step.
Wanted to add one other point to the discussion. I think another best practice in industry is competency-based job descriptions. So you're actually sourcing and selecting on competencies and the proficiency of those competencies. So you take a job description, you break it down, and beyond education, you look at leadership, team ability, analytical skills, and you determine how proficient that person is against that competency. So it's a little bit of work, but competency-based job descriptions, interviewing is also a best practice in industry.
So I think it would be safe, and my colleagues will tell me otherwise if I'm out of line here, but if there is an opportunity for you to look at resources that may assist in ensuring that we are equitable across our positions as it comes to particularly gender issues, but other issues as they've been identified through HR. We would be very interested and willing in hearing what additional resources might assist you in that regard. Is that fair, council members? Hey, thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate the hard work of this commission. You do an incredible job every year, and we utilize your report, so it is incredibly valuable to us. So thank
Mr.
you.
Chair,
Yes.
one more thing that we talked about in the meeting that I don't know if we need to straw poll, but that portion where you found a calculator to look at the living wage, and that it's a free resource to continue tracking that I would like the council to communicate that we'd like you to continue monitoring that living wage and report back to us next year if we need to take that into account and make adjustments based on that.
We can do that.
I don't, that's not an objection from anybody, so if that's enough
It's
indication.
free. Best of all, it doesn't cost
Yeah.
any money
Yeah.
for this.
Well, I have an objection to the rate of the living wage, but
You don't make it.
because it's so low.
Well, that's
I think
that's
the
a
council
valid.
makes less than a living wage.
That's valid. All
I
right.
didn't say that.
Thank you very much for your time and energy. At this point, we will recess as a city council for a dinner break, and we will reconvene 7:05 maybe as the redevelopment agency to wrap up our work there, and then we will adjourn as redevelopment agency, and we only have one agenda item on the council, which is our golf discussion for this evening. So, what's that? I'm sorry? Just golf. we're honestly not trying to be deliberately confusing. But we're going to recess again as the city council. We're working on some RDA business, so I'm going to turn the time back over to Lisa as the chair of the RDA to continue that conversation. And then once that's concluded, we will reconvene as the city council and have our golf discussion.
Okay, and we're back. Let's see, Ben, do you want to join us again? Is that okay? Thank you so much. And Cindy and Jennifer will be with us in a minute. During the break, it was brought to my attention that there is not really a need to rush this in adopting it, other than the developer would like to come in, get things going before we have impact fees again. Is that correct?
As I understand it, yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So, given that we have so many questions about this and a lot of concerns, I think there's a way that we can find to help out the developer if he ends up having to pay impact fees, board members. And I don't, this is a $50 million budget overall, and this is a big chunk of it, and we've talked about our concerns about the expense of undergrounding. One option is the developer could pay for it, and we didn't really talk about that. And so I would suggest that we not look at this, not adopt anything on this tonight, and wait until we have information about maintenance, whether that is if there's a willingness to do an SAA, and unless someone has a motion on the undergrounding separately, we were under the impression that this had to move quickly, and if it's only for that reason, which it sounds like it is, I think we would rather get it right than get it in a hurry. So, board members, any thoughts on that? Okay, does anyone, yeah, go ahead.
Madam Chair, if I
Yeah.
just could, from Ben, I mean, we've been around a lot of circles tonight, so I just wanted to make sure in this opportunity publicly that you have a sense of sort of clarity of direction going forward. So I'm asking you to assess what your confidence level is there. That's probably unfair. But also if you have any questions.
I don't have any questions. So.
Aaron?
I just want to say that it's disappointing, and I realize that this is really not, there's a lot of complexity to this decision that you're talking about, Madam Chair, but that I'm not comfortable in saying we're not going to do this tonight, therefore this developer is going to be looking at paying the impact fees, and we're throwing out there that they might have to pay for the undergrounding. I'm not comfortable with that, and I understand that I'm in the minority of people wanting to move ahead with this tonight. So let's have the discussion we need to in order to make this project as possible as it can be when we have time to do that.
When we have time to do it, so you're not saying tonight.
Well, I'm
So-
happy to make a motion right now, and we could see if it fails.
Okay.
I would be making this motion tonight
Okay.
that you have in front of you.
And just before we get to that motion sheet, staff did notice something that we forgot based on the previous discussion, and apologies to the administrative staff, relating to the fire department review of the design. So we would just add something at the end of C to mention that the final designs would be reviewed through the standard city processes. So I know that came up.
Okay, I can do that.
So
Madam Chair, may I make a motion?
You may indeed.
My motion is to adopt some of the proposed budget amendment that the board Adopt the items listed in the motion sheet relating to budget amendment number 3 for fiscal year 2017 and defer action on remaining items to a future meeting. The below funding is contingent upon final approval of the total project costs or options for delivering the project within the board appropriated budget. Number 1 is $2,290,000 for West Temple Gateway utility undergrounding from the program income fund. Number 2 is $3,660,998 for 900 South Street improvements from A, $1,813,038 from the West Temple Gateway, I think that should say West Temple, not West Templet, Gateway Project Area Funds. B, $1,847,960 from the Program Income Fund. And C, in addition, funds for the 900 South Street improvements are contingent upon the administration recommending how to fund the ongoing maintenance costs of the improvements that would be reviewed at the time of final project costs. And D, that this would go through normal city processes of departmental review. Is that enough for that one? And I further move that the board supports the following straw polls. 1, an investigation of contract clarity for the RDA that may refer to City Code 3.25 or be analogous. Actually, Madam Chair, may I end it at D? And then we could do this other part, as I think it's probably good as a second straw poll.
Okay. There is a motion to adopt as amended verbally to add that item D. Is there a second for this motion?
Before we have a second, Aaron, would you be receptive to an additional friendly amendment, E, to the assess the eligibility of impact fees?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, see none.
Oh, I got a
Derek did.
second.
Derek, you're going to second it? Okay. Then is there discussion about this?
Yeah, actually, a couple of questions. Does the adoption of this motion preclude us from exploring other undergrounding options as we're designing this project? For example, if we're looking at a 6-week design phase, Ben, would it be realistic to say that there's a possibility to come back and include maybe cost assessments for extension of that undergrounding beyond the current proposal that we could potentially revisit for a bonding conversation? Is that a possibility?
It's a yeah, sure.
How can we make that happen?
I think a key step would be to understand the bond constraints first. Since you're talking about bonding for undergrounding power lines, your source of revenue is only the RDA tax increment, which in this project area is just 1 more year. And so you'd be just looking at program income funds. And so it would take some discussions with bond counsel or the financial advisor first to.
And I think I'd be interested in knowing what the costs are and having a conversation about whether we're willing to commit future program income funds to that, if that's what we want to do as a priority there.
Costs for undergrounding beyond 9th South or beyond 3rd West?
Yeah, well, yes. There, on either end of this project, I think there's hope that some opportunity in the future could happen to underground there too. But am I correct? I think
Yes.
Yes. And if
Yep.
and with the expiration of this district next year, those possibilities for us to participate in a funding mechanism for that become pretty remote. And so, if there's a way to come back with an assessment of an additional cost, I think this is the time to do it.
To extend the undergrounding in this area. So the project area, West Temple Gateway, goes from Main Street down to 3rd West. So what's proposed here
2 blocks.
would be built, in West Temple Gateway, which expires in 2018. So
Right.
going further west is Granary, and we could look at potentially, extending into Granary.
And so does this accommodate all of our needs going east? I mean, or do we have any additional needs going
No,
east? Okay.
because if you go 3 power poles to the east of West Temple, it's undergrounded, and I forget how far east it goes. It goes way east.
So this would, our current proposal picks up for where, on the east side where it's currently underground and extends it west.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
And I do think that we might want to look at that extended west component.
Okay.
And we still have a few more years in the granary, and if it's, I don't remember if I think the granary crosses 9th there, doesn't it? Doesn't it go on the south side of 9th?
I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that would be another funding possibility for a bonding opportunity if that's.
Dan, I would entertain a friendly amendment for that to be F of this, if you want to put that into
And I articulate
couple
it,
of words.
that in addition, an additional condition is that we explore funding costs for a western extension beyond the current proposal.
Madam Chair,
James.
I love those ideas, Stan, but I still think that we can find those things out by next meeting or the meeting after that. There's just, for me, there are too many variables in this scenario for us to try and get this passed just to make it happen for one developer who's trying to get his project approved before the timeline ends in impact fees. So I understand why we're trying to get this done, but for me, there are too many variables, too many questions that are going to come back to us that we need to button those up before we actually get this done.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Andrew.
as I read this, it's contingent on us having another evaluation of the entire proposal. Is that correct, budgetary-wise?
Yes.
It sounds like.
The sense of how soon we look at doing that? What's sort of our intention here?
I think it would be contingent upon when the final designs and final costs were received, and then also when the administration would come back for a recommendation on the maintenance. So as quick as that would happen, that would determine how quick it comes back.
So James, is that what you're thinking as well? Those are the issues you want resolved before you even take this proposal with the contingencies in it? What's the difference for you?
We actually have hard numbers where Stan's talking about going west of West Temple. I love the idea because that connectivity on the 9 line or 9th South. But, I mean, we heard it today. We don't have hard numbers on really anything except for Rocky Mountain Power. We don't, for us to move forward and say, okay, well, if they meet these conditions, it's the same thing for us to say, get us all the information. Don't guesstimate about it. Let's see what we can actually accomplish by moving this forward. Whether that goes into discussing bonding, infrastructure in those areas, that we can actually do this project right.
Madam Chair, I call for the vote.
What may I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
What does this get us, Ben? By putting this forward tonight, if we approve it by vote, what's the benefit to?
So the benefit to the project is that I'm able to tell my design team to continue, finalize the design, be able to get those hard numbers. It does help the developer in question be able to, from what I understand, part of his financing structure is he needs a commitment in order for that financing to be finalized. So it helps that way. So I think for the project, it just helps move it along.
So our commitment is contingent on unknown numbers and then not knowing where our threshold is for those numbers. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Ben, I have a question also. Did I understand that we can't get a firm number from Rocky Mountain until we appropriate the money? Or is that not?
It's until the design is 100%
Right.
complete and
Yeah.
they've signed a contract.
So they're
Okay.
not going to commit to that. I mean, they've given me a commitment for this
For that,
number, and that's
right.
the best that I can provide
Right.
at this point.
But they won't give us a firm number that we know is firm until we have a contract,
Right.
right? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Let's go ahead and vote. I'm going to roll call this. Andrew?
I'll go yay.
Derek?
Yay.
Stan?
Yay.
I'm a no.
I am shocked,
Aaron?
and I'll be a yay.
James?
It doesn't matter, I'm a no.
Leave that.
Okay.
But you always matter, James. I don't want you to.
You always matter. Okay. So this motion passes.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Can I just say, I'm a little bit offended, I won't be, that this is, the comment about this being for one developer, because we've been through a lot of transition and it's taken a year and a half. And this Central Ninth area has been floating in the flux as we are trying to get our arms around a new budget, essentially. And developments are paying the price as they wait. And I understand what it looks like with a quick comment like that, but the reality of the work that we're trying to do here is big work. It's taking a long time, but we have economic situations happening today that are the fallout of that. So thanks.
May I also add, Madam Chair, that there are some pretty incredible, successful developments happening in the Central 9 area. Some sitting at this table. But I am really thrilled about what's happening there and what's been happening because of the RDA's commitment to this neighborhood. And it's all happened in the last 5 years. Again, here we are with the expiration of an RDA area, and we want to do more, but we kind of waited too long and don't have the money to do everything we want to do because of our historic strategy. So that wasn't one more kick. It was just truly a reminder to me and hopefully to others that we need to rethink how we incentivize RDA districts.
Okay, and we are going to move on to number 4, Station Center, and discuss that. And I'd like to invite Kara to come up on that. And also Katie Lewis, if you will come up. And it is my understanding that one of the concerns here is that we have contracts that are set to expire on March 31. Would have been really, really nice to have had that information prior to tonight to know that. Because once again, we feel like we are being pushed to the wall to make a quick decision. We're talking about millions of dollars. I am not excited to make a decision about millions of dollars in just a few brief moments, but go ahead and tell us where we are about these 2 contracts that expire on Friday.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. We have executed 2 option to purchase agreements in Station Center. One is for Parcel 1, and that's with the Boyer Cowboy team. That includes language that says we will provide the final design for Pierpont Avenue and 600 West by March 31st.
And where are we in that design?
We have had the preliminary plans approved by city departments, and we are working toward the final design with the goal of having that approved by July 31st.
So they won't be ready by March 31st.
Right.
Okay, and what happens if we don't have them ready by March 31st? What is the penalty for that?
I think I will defer to Katie on that question.
So the option to purchase agreement for that particular parcel says that if the RDA is in default, then the developer has the right to specific performance, and specific performance means that the developer can force the RDA to perform under the contract, which would mean selling pursuant to the terms of the contract. Now, the RDA is not in default right now, and there are options for renegotiation, but that is what that particular contract says.
Who wrote that contract?
That was a Jones-Waldo contract.
At the direction of the RDA?
It's a form that has been in the RDA's hands for a long time, and I don't know if they directed on that specific provision, but that's something that we, going forward, will never have in any of the contracts.
I'm sickened by that in there, that contract.
Certainly benefits the developer and not the RDA. But so, Katie, what are our options rather than, you mentioned there were options to not be in default.
So I think the first question is whether the RDA currently has budget to pay for completion of those studies. And I am assuming that they don't, and that's part of what this budget amendment is tonight, but I don't know. Do you have budget for it right now?
To complete the design? Yes.
Okay, so if they already have budget, that's a great thing, because what that means is that There's no further action that you all need to take tonight on this particular provision, and the contract will have to be renegotiated in order to extend that March 31 deadline, which can be done as long as there's budget. Our concern has always been if there's not budget, it can't be amended to extend it because that would be perpetuating a contractual obligation without financial resources
Very thing we
behind it.
talked about earlier that we don't want to
Correct.
continue to do.
Correct. So as long as there's
Okay.
budget for the design, then
Then we're okay.
no action needs to be taken by the board tonight.
Okay. Karen?
But defaulting would put us in obligation to complete that which there may be no funds to do in the first place.
Well, so this is just the first deadline for final plans, and that's a great point, Board Member Mendenhall. The further down the road the RDA gets on these milestones without having, the whole package of financing, the harder it will be to extricate. But the contract right now, that particular provision is funded.
There is Madam Chair, if I might, there's some talk in the community that it's unlikely that anything of substance will happen in this area until the Homeless Resource Center issues are resolved, and potentially even until they're relocated and open and functioning. Are you getting any indication from the developer of their concerns around this? I mean, is it influencing their timeline? Are they slowing their project based on this? I asked for a couple reasons, because I think it influences how we prioritize funding along there. I think it also might influence how we do some long-term design based on some unknown information, again, about what services might remain there for the homeless community, what definitely will relocate, what might just get reduced. I mean, a whole host of questions that we will progressively, hopefully, learn more about in the next year and a half, but really are just speculating at this point. Do you have a sense of?
I think what I can say about the developer for Parcel 1 is that in their agreement, they are on track right now to be moving forward and completing the obligations of their agreement and closing on the property in 2017. So, we've had a lot of discussions with him, but he has still indicated that that is his plan, is to close on the property this year. I can also say that there are other developers in the neighborhood who are making plans to move forward with their developments this year and next year and hoping to break ground in 2018.
You're not getting any indication that there's maybe some pause around it? I know I know it's putting you on the spot, but I would not be surprised if there was. But here's a follow-up question then. So on this particular deal, when they close on the property, do they purchase the property? Because normally we do that sort of later in the process. I mean, we've done all sorts of configurations of that. But when they close, do they pay us?
I have to say that this is not a contract that I've been working on. Jill Wilkerson-Smith has been, and she is out. So I will do my best to answer that question. I do know that this is an unusual two-part option to purchase agreement. And so the developer is required to provide their financing package to us on May 31st, and then that will trigger the second phase of their option to purchase agreement, which will result in the closing in 2017. And I believe that our typical deal is that they will be breaking ground within days of the closing.
And so we have a purchase price agreed upon, I'm assuming, if we have the contract in place.
We do.
And so have we accounted for that revenue as we're looking at financing packages in this neighborhood?
Financing infrastructure, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
I think we have identified that as one potential source of financing, of funding the gap that we have remaining for the infrastructure. That's not something that the board has, officially voted on doing. So that's one option. There's also future tax increment that we could look at. So that's not something, that is decided, but that is one option.
So but it's revenue that, for all purposes today, we intend to capture in 2017-18
Yes.
fiscal year. So I'm just curious, Madam Chair, about how we're accounting for that as we're looking at a annual budget primarily for next year. So I think it's something that I always want to flag to say that might be a piece of the funding mechanism as we go forward there. And my assumption would be that if that doesn't conclude in that fashion, that it might delay our need to provide infrastructure improvements based on where they are in their process. But I don't want to have that discussion tonight.
Okay.
Okay, and the second one?
The second one is with Landforge for Parcel 2, and that agreement states that we will provide temporary access and utilities and parking for their project by March 31st.
And?
So, and that's actually construction of temporary improvements. So that is an item that requires budget, and I don't know the cost of that. I don't know if staff has the cost of it. But what it also says is if those temporary improvements are not constructed by March 31st, which constructed, then the agreement will terminate. So again, this is a situation where if it's not funded, then there are contractual consequences. If it is funded, then the contract could be renegotiated by the administration to try to extend that deadline. But we were reluctant to recommend extending without, not reluctant, we did not recommend extending without having a budgetary appropriation.
And what is the penalty for defaulting on this? Is it also specific performance?
So it's actually termination. The contract automatically terminates.
Okay.
Yes.
Cindy?
These are things that we should have been able to provide to you in our written staff report, but we cannot do that if we're not given that information. We had the contract, I'm sure, in the stack of 950 pages, but that's typically something that an administration would disclose to us so that we could disclose it to you long before now so that there was an option to get it taken care of. So I apologize, but unless we can find a way for us to get complete information, we're going to continue in this vein.
Okay, so board members, I think we go ahead.
I'm sorry, Madam
James.
Chair.
Yeah.
I need an explanation from the administration. I'm sorry. It's absolutely ridiculous to me that our staff would have had to comb through 900 some odd pages of documents to figure this out. Why didn't they get that information?
Ed, do you mind joining me? Thanks.
These contracts were provided. I think I'm not clear why we're presenting these right now. I think the goal was to work with the council staff and understand as we went through the contracts and the board's budgeting process. Again, we know that projects are caught between these two items, and they were provided,
but not red flagged.
Not red flagged, and we did try to provide information to the council staff when we had a specific commitment to a infrastructure improvement. But again, similar to what we're doing with our other contracts, I think I was hoping that we would come up with options of how we move these contracts from before and then after and discuss those in more in depth versus having the discussion here. And I think that's where we were at, is how we then approach the developers and work out a new contractual agreement that is more in line with the new way that the RDA is doing things. So I think that's where my recommendation being is realizing that these contracts they were done in an old system. They weren't reviewed by the city attorneys in depth, and that maybe there's ways that we renegotiate these contracts to make sure that we're still, and I think most of these developers in discussion are flexible with working us with this. I mean, Dan Lofgren is one of them, and he I know speaks with many of the board members, and I think we could go back and really talk to these developers one-on-one, and they're familiar with what the transition's going on right now, and I think that might be a good way to go back and maybe approach this is making sure that we work with the contracts based on our current budget discussions.
Aaron and then
I'm
Stan.
sorry, that just seems to ignore the fact that these contracts have a date of this week
Yeah.
on them that binds us to action and allows them and our inaction to legally require us to go ahead with projects that we have not allocated funding for. And that doesn't seem to be being addressed here.
And Madam Chair, may I answer? I think that if the board determined that it didn't want to fund these projects this week, then the RDA staff would work directly with the legal counsel and with the developers to determine what our next steps are. So I think that would be, as Katie mentioned, that there would be, we'd have to look at that as part of a renegotiation and stuff. So the intent wasn't.
The board isn't getting the option to really decide if we want to fund these or not, because our back is against the wall with days. We can't make a real decision in this position that we're put in. And to have our staff have almost 1,000 pages in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time to process with no red flags saying these are timely issues, here they are up front, this is unreasonable.
Well, and if it,
Madam Chair,
Dan.
this is a question I think for Katie and for Ed. Have we approached, I'm imagining that there is I'm hoping there's some option in our contract that we can, with agreement on both parties, we can renegotiate terms. Rather than saying we're up against a wall for, do we have an opportunity to approach either of these developers and renegotiate an opportunity for an extension that doesn't trigger performance or an extension that doesn't trigger termination of the contract?
And I'll have Katie come join us, but yeah, come sit up.
I guess another question to add is whether the administration will be able to construct that parking by the end of the week.
So the two contracts, the Parcel 1 Boyer Cowboy contract, I think can be extended because there is already budget appropriated for it to meet the contractual obligation. So in that particular instance, I think the administration could readily go back to Boyer Cowboy and renegotiate because there's budget behind it. The Land Forge contract is more difficult because it requires a budgetary appropriation, and our office has recommended not extending a contract that continues a contractual obligation if it doesn't have budget behind it. So the options for the administration on that contract would be to try to renegotiate something and remove that language from the contract, or allow it to terminate and start renegotiation or start negotiations over.
So I have a question in regards to that renegotiating. Of the properties that we have in Station Center area, if we did renegotiate those leases, could we renegotiate them to include an SAA to maintain O&M in the area for those streets?
So my understanding is that all of the option to purchase agreements currently say that there will be some fee structure put into place to help pay for maintenance of improvements. It doesn't specifically say an SAA, but it does require those developers to agree to some sort of fee payment at this point.
Okay. And if it is renegotiated, I'd like to have stronger wording than that too.
So I'm just, and this is a strategic question, I know, but could you give me some sense, Ed and Katie, of the second contract, a conversation of renegotiating and removing either the budgetary requirement or starting over? I imagine if we started over, we would fundamentally do the same contract again look at the minor modifications we're talking about. Any sense of either of those options?
I think, again, the developers we're working with would be very open to renegotiating those contracts. And based on the prior, and recognizing the change in our budgeting system, I think we could have those negotiations and make sure that we have a contract that is meeting that we are removing those financial commitments for infrastructure improvements, but that they have at least an option to move forward for the ground and doing those other improvements. And then that would be part of what we'd work closely with Katie on, is making sure that they're in line with the new requirements.
And I totally understand that they might want to have a conversation about some other guarantees for themselves. I mean, I would if I were a developer making a deal. Madam Chair, I think one of the reasons I'm interested in pursuing an option like this is because in this area, it's a really significant financial contribution, and I do seriously believe we have some funding options. And even the financials we're talking about right now don't get us there entirely. And the staff has done and is doing a lot of work on the Festival Street, some reconfigurations on 500 West that are all really closely integrated. There are sort of these ongoing conversations with the Public Market and the Downtown Alliance, and those, I think, have been some interest has been rekindled in how things might be located in this neighborhood in relationship to the Rio Grande Depot, and I think there's a real opportunity over the next 6 months to do some pretty extensive collaboration and pulling some proposal together for what our actual costs would be and how we could creatively finance that. I think this is one of those areas where, in this particular situation, where a large investment to do it all at once makes total sense. This does not make a lot of sense to try to do improvements incrementally along that street. I think we would save quite a bit of money if we could figure out how to do it all at once. Am I wrong there? Tell me, staff, if your assessment's different.
No, I think incrementally I would definitely be more costly. But I think it goes back to the point that as the neighborhood transitions, we could make those design or that development design, make sure it fits with maybe the state of the neighborhood and build them in a way that those actual improvements could do a baseline and then incrementally add things as the neighborhood changes.
Yeah, and there's some that make sense, but there are, I mean, the Festival Street, to me, it's like that's a big one-time quick investment that we probably need to do all at once. But 500 West could phase in. There's some 300, there's still some 600, 600 West, yeah, where we have some issues with track in the street, and how do we facilitate crossing across the street there. So I'm hopeful that we could do some renegotiation and buy us a little time to look at this. It is a changing neighborhood, and it certainly is going to change in the next 2 years based on the homeless resource center conversation.
Katie, I have a question. If we've started to renegotiate on the Cowboy Partners one prior to Friday, then does that forestall the triggering of specific performance?
So if the administration chooses to renegotiate Boyer Cowboy, what I'm hearing is that even if that because there is already budget in place, the administration could renegotiate the deadline on delivering final plans. And if Boyer Cowboy agreed to that extension, then the RDA would not be in default and it would not trigger specific performance. And there's no other action that needs to be taken by the board in order to get that moving forward.
All right. And so in looking at this, is that $320,000, I think it is that the amount is that for that design part? I'm trying to find it. Yeah. The already approved part, is that what that is being used for?
That funded design.
For that, okay. So do we need we don't need to do anything then?
So for the Boyer Cowboy contract, as long as the $320,000 is sufficient to complete the plans, which is we're hearing that it is, then it is now in the administration's court to
Okay.
renegotiate that deadline.
All right, then we won't take any action on that. If
And
Andrew, did you want to weigh in? Go ahead.
My calmness belies sort of my frustration internally. What will be different going forward for us, at least for me, in understanding the future contracts, deadlines, things we'll be looking at so that I can be prepared for this? What will be different in the future so that we don't run down this road again?
So I think from a legal perspective, it circles back down to the presentation that you all started your budget conversation with earlier this evening, and that is that there will be revisions both to the RDA's contracts and then also proposals for policies and administrative procedures to ensure that appropriations of budget always come before contractual obligations. And there will also be non-appropriation language in all of the contracts, so if there is a future obligation, that it will never bind a council, and it will never be a contractual obligation without an appropriation.
David Litback?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that question. I'd like to address it if that's okay as well. One, I want to acknowledge and on behalf of the administration take responsibility for the oversight and the error and not highlighting that. I acknowledge the frustration and accept responsibility for that. It's an error. I hope everyone clearly understands that there was no intent, obviously, in hiding information. Council staff as well as RDA staff have been working very hard, very, very hard over this last year to cobble together an annual budget, which we still haven't fully approved, this current year's budget, that takes a way of doing business for multiple years and really shifting to a new way of doing business, a way of doing business that will have a much higher level of transparency, a much higher level of accountability, and I think a level of familiarity to all of us as we mimic, in many ways, the city process, which will have some of those protections in place. So I think you will see a lot of things. I was telling council staff earlier, through this process, the one saving grace for me is we're starting a new budget, and it's going to be different. And it's going to be a different kind of conversation, and that's exciting. But again, I want to acknowledge the frustration, but I also want everyone to understand real clearly that both RDA staff and council staff have been working very hard. And I get the frustration and understand the frustration, but I want to assure you that that was not intentional. It was an error. It was a mistake. We'll own it. We'll accept it. And we will move forward because we have to. Thank you.
I appreciate that, and my intention is not to embarrass anybody or belabor the point. My question is procedurally. There's a contractual change in sort of how we're doing that piece, but procedurally about deadlines, about our timeframes in the future, what will be different that I can sort of refer back to in the future for my own benefit or the council's benefit when we're looking forward, whether it's planning for the next month, 2 months, 3 months, what can we expect, I guess? Do I know?
With this particular
No, for
contract?
contracts, period, because this is clearly one of those times when a process didn't work.
Well, I
it
think
shouldn't sort of come
sure.
this way and end up the week of in front of us for the first time.
Absolutely.
So what changes?
Well, I think
look
one,
at?
as Katie said, the contracts will be written internally, which will have, I think, a higher level of confidence for all of us. We will, as the conversation today regarding policy and the need for policy to help drive some of these discussions moving into the future. And as we move into following the Fiscal Procedures Act, which again is similar to mimicking the city process, there are built-in built-in transparency, built-in protections that I think are just not in place yet. So I think you will see a fundamentally different approach to how the budget is and how the contracts work, as both from administrative process and from a policy process.
Do we have concerns about upcoming deadlines that you're aware of, or if we know now that are imminent?
So as a follow-up question to that, I think, is this particular contract with an expiration date of the end of this month, do we need to take any action by this body to encourage staff to start renegotiation? I mean, they can do that without us as long as that funding component is dealt with.
Correct.
Yeah, so we don't need any action to do that.
Now, the Land Forge contract is still, so we've talked about Boyer Cowboy, but there's also the Land Forge contract that does terminate by its own terms on March 31st, and that is, the improvements are not funded for that, as I understand.
So Madam Chair, my intent would be that the staff immediately start conversations about extending that contract under the sort of new conditions, directions that we're talking about for contract funding versus, appropriation.
Can you do that when it's not funded?
So that's the issue with that, is
They
that
can't talk at all. They can't have that conversation.
well, I mean, it's an administrative function, and the administration can certainly reach out to the developer, and the options would be renegotiating to remove any
That
conditions
would be my intent.
that include funding, or the administration can choose to let the contract expire. And that is...
That's their option.
Those are their options.
Absolutely.
And without funding from the board, then it really is the administration's choice which direction to take.
So, so I would say that would be my intent, would be either of those options. I'd be okay with, but it gives us some time to come back and have a conversation about the funding of that particular component, because unfortunately we're just literally out of time tonight to do that. So I would like to just encourage them to consider either of those options and have those conversations, but I'm uncomfortable funding it tonight.
And Madam Chair, may I add?
Yeah.
I do apologize to the City Council and the City Council staff. This wasn't included. I think the intent was that under our understanding, separation of powers contracts are now negotiated as an administrative document, and that we would move forward based on what the board's budget discussion was today. So our intent was not to hide information or anything, but to understand that we are also renegotiating another contract with the developer. We made commitments to these, so we are working hard to back out. Our intent was not, I didn't realize this was going to come up in the meeting today, and it was to get that budget direction and then determine how we move forward with these contracts. And so, again, I apologize. Our intent was not to hide this information or make sure that we are working collaboratively, and we want to make sure that we're transparent as possible.
I appreciate that, Ed, and my hope is that we just move forward, Madam Chair, on this.
Okay.
So, Madam Chair, I'm not sure where we are on the agenda, but as the chair of the council,
I'm going to tell you where we are in the agenda. We are done. We're saturated at this point with...
we need a motion to table until our next meeting the remainder budget items, or I don't want them to get lost.
Right. It is my intent to resume on April 3rd, April 11th with item number 3, 500 West Public Market Studies, and continue to power through this. We will discuss if we need to start an hour earlier.
Okay.
So that we can do it, but I think everyone is at maximum brain capacity on RDA budget at this point.
And for
So
clarification,
do we need a motion for that? Okay.
And as clarification, we resolved the issue tonight, so we don't need to schedule some time in next week's council meeting.
Right.
Okay.
That is correct. Okay, with that,
I move we adjourn.
there's second? Yes. All right, fifth,
Okay.
sixth. Okay, the motion by Board Member Penfold, seconded by Board Member Rogers. The RDA stands adjourned. Thank you. And
Thanks, Lisa. Let's just take a brief break. We have one item on our council agenda. It's our golf update around our fee schedule proposal. So I'm just going to give people time. Are you guys okay not dispersing? Yeah. Okay, good. This is an This is an informational update on a proposal for some fee structure changes to the golf fees. The administration has requested that we address these quickly as the season has probably already started. Oh, I'm sorry. We have to wait. We have to wait until they can record us. I can just talk and talk and talk and nobody will remember anything I said. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Just yell at me. Just yell at me. I can. All right, good. We're ready. So, as I was saying, this is an update from the administration on a proposal for a fee structure change that they have. The schedule that we have tentatively for this is a briefing tonight, so this is an opportunity for questions, comments. We will hold a public hearing to accept comment on April 18th, and we're tentatively scheduled for council action on the 18th. If you have a need for some follow-up information, if we need the staff to come back to us, this is the opportunity to let them know what additional information you might need, and we can probably do a quick update on the 18th as well. So, Allison, do you want to start?
Sure. As the chair mentioned, this is a request for some ordinance changes on behalf of the Golf Division, in part to approve a new golf fee schedule for the 2017 season, and in part for some other ordinance changes that they propose. There are three big areas probably for attention. One would be the revenue note on the first page of the transmittal, which suggests that the FY18 budget would increase by $128,000 compared to the FY17 budget. Second, that there are a number of fee changes that the council might have interest in requesting more information about. And then third, in terms of other proposed ordinance changes, there are some changes over who would within golf would be allowed to have authority over changing fees. And then second, there may be some questions by the council on what's going on with the golf director position. We know Dan Dent as being hired for the golf director position, and he is not exercising that anymore, or maybe he is.
Feels like I am.
So those would be the major points to consider. I'm happy to continue or wait for questions. Yeah, or toss it to the guys who know.
No, we're just respectfully requesting council's consideration over these pretty much slight pricing changes for the 2017 season. We do have some more significant changes to the ordinance, which we think is going to simplify this process going forward in terms of how we go about pricing the golf fees. And so that's kind of what we're here for.
I have a quick question. I want to turn it over to other council members. Allison, we have this discussion frequently about the responsibility of the council to set fees and the ability or inability for the council to delegate that authority. How's that addressed in this proposal?
Essentially, according to the ordinance, there would be three different aspects of fee setting. Two of them are already existing in ordinance. So on the one hand, if you look on, it would be the third page of the staff report, there's a chart. Fee schedule adjustments would continue to be done by either the public services director or the mayor or their designees. The membership programs would be under the authority of the golf program director or designee, and hence the question about who the golf director is or who's acting in that capacity. And then third, the days and times that reduced greens fees are valid for seniors, juniors, and school golf teams would actually be devolved to head golf pros at each course, which is something that hasn't been done in the past. The idea is to provide them with additional flexibility, but the other side of that is that means that's not in the fee schedule.
So Dan, assuming that there's a desire, I mean, I'm just basing on this, the report, there's a desire to create some flexibility for individual golf courses. But have you in this process developed any kind of standards or expectations for how delegating the ability to set fees in these areas of flexibility, how do we hold those pros or whoever does that accountable to them? I mean, because I imagine there's a possibility you could set a fee that started showing a loss in a course. So how are you anticipating managing that, or how are you managing those expectations of setting fees, but showing sufficient revenue to cover the cost?
Yeah, and that's exactly one of the reasons we want to change the ordinances, so that we can align the decision-making on the fees with the accountability. With the head golf professionals, the associate golf director, and the golf director, or me as the director in public services. Right now, fees are set well in advance, and they're very far from the head golf professional at the golf course. And so in many respects, their hands are tied on being able to recruit larger group outings or tournaments, or even change a price on a daily basis when the course is empty, but the weather's good. And if we change the price and send out an email for a temporary special or promotion, we could fill the course up, we could generate revenue. So the expectations on performance for the head professionals, or at the golf course level and with the golf administrative staff, is going to be on total revenues and managing expenses. So basically the profitability of the golf course.
So do you see any challenges with that going forward, where we have situations where some of our courses produce more revenue than expense, and other of our courses have more expense than revenue? Do you see, are we disincentivizing those courses that tend to do well with revenue from maintaining that high level of revenue, where we're dispersing some of that revenue across the whole system? Does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense, and one of our goals and what we're working on in our plan for FY18 and beyond is just that: is to start treating the golf courses as individual profit centers versus just treating all 6 golf courses as one. And we will set those expectations based on the historical performance of the golf course. So, for example, we're not going to be expecting the same level of profitability out of Rose Park that we will out of Mountaindale. That doesn't change the performance measurements that we have for each of the golf courses and the staff associated with that golf course. At the division level, then it's Matt and myself and other managers at of the golf system that are held accountable for all the performance of all of the golf courses.
Matt, I apologize, I didn't introduce you. Matt, could you introduce yourself? And
yeah, I'm Matt Kameyer. I'm the associate golf director.
So questions, comments, council members?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Lisa, and then James.
I've been doing golf
Andrew.
for a long time here, and thank you for bringing us. I think this is an innovative plan. We talked about it during our many discussions in the golf subcommittee. As one option is having them all be independent, and I'm glad we're trying something new, because what we're doing hasn't been working. But I have a few questions. With the proposed changes, I'm going through this and I'm seeing fees lower at Bonneville and Mountaindale. Loyalty members less than 2016. Golf cart fees would be reduced. Significant reductions for young adult golfers, and special golf rates at Rose Park. Mountaindale reduced green fees for loyalty members, and twilight green fees reductions would be introduced. everybody likes the idea of reductions, but when you are running at such a deficit, do the math for me on how all those reductions are going to get you where you need to be.
Well, so part of this process that we've gone through, again, is individual golf courses. So if we take them one at a time, for example, Mountaindale actually produces the best profitability of any golf course in our system. However, it's only 45% utilized. That means that 55% of our tee times go unutilized. To fill up that golf course, we don't raise prices, because that's just going to lower the utilization. We need to lower prices. We need to get more people out to the golf course. Last year, when we reduced the discount of our loyalty program, we saw quite a few players, golf customers, leave our golf system, not buy our loyalty program, and not play our golf courses. So through the process of looking at individual courses, talking with our head professionals and their staffs, doing customer focus groups, what we have determined is that we have gaps in the utilization of our golf courses and the player types, and we're trying to win back our loyal customers who are the frequent players that are playing multiple rounds every year. At the same time, we're trying to keep our rack rate or our standard rate as high as possible, because those customers aren't quite as price sensitive. So we're trying to do both of those things. And in terms of seniors and juniors, we want to keep them in our golf system, and a lot of times that means a lower price. But we don't want to restrict the days as much as we did last year, because we saw a lot of our seniors leave our golf courses because other golf courses along the Wasatch Front were allowing them to play their golf courses on those days for the same or lower price. The young adult rate that we're proposing and introducing this year, as we looked at numbers of information that we'd have, and we don't have a ton of information, but that age group doesn't have a lot of discretionary income. We've developed them as players as juniors, and then when after they graduate high school and they hit college, they don't have enough money to continue to play golf or to play as much golf. So we wanted to offer a lower rate for them to try to get them back out to the golf course.
So my understanding is that you hope that by increasing rounds, you will make up the difference in lowering the price, right? That will cover.
That's
that
the
difference.
strategy.
That's
yes.
the goal. How do you propose bringing back the people you lost last year? How are you funding that?
We're doing it through aggressive word of mouth and accountability at our golf shops, and through.
I don't see the reporter here to write that and put it in the paper and give you free advertising.
So that's how we're doing it. We do have what I consider. I've been here 9 months, and I've looked at a lot of things, but I consider that our marketing programs, our loyalty program, our social media program that Matt has built is certainly the best in the state, maybe the best in the country. We have 38,000 people in our database, so we will be leveraging that to get the information out. And then at the golf course level, our professionals and our staff are going to aggressively, with word of mouth, upsell, cross-sell the customers that come in.
Okay, next question is, I'm interested to know how you propose to deal with the operating deficit from FY17, which we know is considerable, and just given the late hour, if you can try to give us a concise answer, that'd be great.
The FY17 deficit is going to be a tough one, where we've only got 3-4 months left in the year, and
it keeps raining.
We can hope. That's not a very good strategy, but we can hope for increased play for these last few months and get the revenues up. But I don't expect it to go up high enough to cover that deficit. That's just the reality. Our only other option is to cut costs, and even cutting costs, what costs we have available to us to cut, wouldn't materialize in FY17. So the reality of how are we going to cover that deficit? We're going to cover it through our CIP revenues that we've collected over the year that have built up. That's what's going to balance our fund. For FY18, so we don't get into this in the future, that's what we're working on right now, is how do we balance this budget with operating revenues and operating expenses And the only real option we have at our disposal right now is to cut costs.
So if you're using CIP, that means you're deferring maintenance further, right?
Yeah, actually, the reality of using CIP puts us in a bit of a bind because the CIP funds right now are pretty much dedicated to paying the debt service on the secondary water systems that were installed over the past, or that are being installed now. So that the projections for our CIP revenues are just enough to cover that debt service. So that wouldn't even if we didn't use any of the CIP money to cover our operating deficit this year, we won't have any money for maintenance or capital improvements.
So I'm confused. You said all the CIP money is committed to the water stuff, but you're going to use that to fill the gap? How do you do that if it's already committed?
Well, it's not committed. That's what it's intended for.
Okay.
But according to state law, we can use that revenues to balance the Gulf Enterprise Fund.
But, so I was thinking you were farther down the road in terms of doing the water, but you just will stop where you are? Is that?
I'm not sure.
With doing the water, changing the water sourcing?
Those are done.
We'll do that. Okay, that's what I thought.
We're paying for that already.
I'm confused then about what the CIP money was committed to.
Well, we collect $1 per round
Yeah.
for CIP, and as that builds up, then that money is used to pay that debt service. So
Okay.
down the road, as we use more of that for things like balancing the operating deficit, we will get into a bind because we will run out of money.
You still have to pay the debt service with that money. But there's extra for you to be able to use for the deficit you have for this year?
Yeah, right now, I think we have 1.4 million
Okay.
in that fund balance.
And final question.
Can I just do a
Yeah,
follow-up on that?
Absolutely.
Is Glendale already on secondary water? Because I know that they were waiting.
It is not.
Okay.
We're delayed by the Army Corps of Engineers for the permit to get into the canal, and that is looking like June before we get that permit. We're going to start construction right now and get as much done as we can, and then when we get the permit, we'll be able to finish it very quickly. We are paying for that, though, already, because the funds used for those secondary water projects went into an escrow account under the contract, and we've already started paying for that.
And finally, just a request that when you come before us during the budget cycle, if you could give us a lot more detail on the methodology of how you've done your revenue projections, so we can see that really clearly. That'd
Okay.
be really helpful, just a request for budget season. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry for all those questions.
Certainly. James?
I have one question. I think that this is great. I think for what we can do, this is a great opportunity. My question is, Dan, are you going to stay as the director of golf, or what's going on there?
Well, I was the director of golf up until the end of the year, and then I accepted a position as deputy director in public services, but it was with the understanding that I would continue to oversee the golf division in that capacity. Because of the budget constraints that we have and the need to cut costs, that is an obvious position that we wouldn't backfill, because there's no, I'll continue to try to do it. We have a great management team in Matt. Bryce Lindeman is helping as well. So I think between the three of us, we can continue to manage the golf division and not incur the cost to hire somebody else.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Thanks, James. Andrew? You're good?
I give my time to Derek.
Derek passes on his time. Dan, as well as Lisa, would like to see how you've worked out your projections, because my assumption, based on just some of the comments you made, was that you're hoping for an increased revenue in the next fiscal year based on increased play. Of course, you heard last time that we have concerns about that, because we've had that conversation several times, but I would be really interested in seeing your projections. So as you come back before us in the budget process, I think that would be very valuable. If you could help provide that to Allison in advance so that it gets wrapped into the staff report, that would be helpful.
Excellent.
Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, one more.
Yes, Andrew?
So you were talking very clearly a minute ago about separating out each of the courses as an individual entity in some capacity, especially budgetarily, and also rounds played. and this stuff, it wasn't done that way. It was still consolidated all together. Is that going to change in the future as far how you're reporting to us?
Well, we roll them all together, and what we try to do is separate them out. And in this, you'll notice that Rose Park, for example, has a different fee than Glendale, and Glendale has a different fee than Bonneville.
Sure.
So we separate them at that level, but we try to roll them up and summarize them so you can see it all in one picture. But we will continue to move forward, trying to separate as much as possible and have individual profit centers so we know what the revenues are, what the expenses are, what the performance metrics are for each golf course, and then where it makes sense, bring them all together as a golf division. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, it helps us because I think we've seen enough of this to be clear that there's vast differences among the golf courses. And the capacity, the potential, everything about them is very different. And it's helpful for us to see the golf fund as a bunch of individual parts, especially if you're looking at your managers or your individual courses as accountable for their production. It'd be nice to see how that goes individually. So I appreciate that in the future. Yeah.
And with that, we see each individual golf course as having a different purpose in the community. Some of them are built for certain types of play, and some of them are built for different types of community activities.
And I think we'll have to be, if that's the intention going forward as a policy, essentially, we're going to need to be very clear about that in our discussions as well, because I don't think we've been there to my experience at this point. We haven't talked about it that way. We still talk about the golf fund, and not necessarily there's several different entities within the golf fund, and some are cost takers and some are cost producers, right?
Some of them don't generate quite as much revenue as others.
Yes, so it'd be nice to have that discussion going forward, Mr. Chair, because I think we need to be clear as well in our discussions about that, if that's where we're going.
Cindy?
Just one quick thing, and that is the CIP fee that's being referred to was a fee that the city council imposed that would be strictly dedicated to capital improvements. So just to put that into the record so that there's not an impression that the council is expressing support tonight for using that to balance the operating budget. I don't think you're expressing a view on that at this time.
No, I think that's a concern. That's a fair assessment. Any other questions, comments? All right, we will schedule. I don't think we have any follow-up, so we set the time next week, and I think we schedule a public hearing for the 18th and a tentative decision for that evening. Thank you. Thank you so much for waiting. I know that the RDA discussion was riveting, and you followed every bit of it, and you enjoyed watching government in process. So,
but it made you see that we're
but
pretty
thank you
nice
anyway.
to you
Thanks
guys.
for staying anyway.
Yeah, this was a much better meeting than the RDA meeting. So
we are now adjourned. Thank you, council members. Oh, do we have no announcement? Oh, do we?
Councilmember Kitchen
We're not
has
adjourned.
Expressed an interest in attending the next city conference.
All in
and
favor.
Next city, and he actually applied for and received a scholarship for the tuition for that. So the council would be asked to cover the per diem, the airfare, and the hotel.
So I think, Derek, you need to tell us a little bit about what it is and what you hope to learn.
Well, do we all know what nextcity.org is? It's a city planning, city geek blog, essentially, and they put on this annual conference of 40 city leaders from all over the country to meet and talk about good urban planning, best practices, innovative new ideas for land use and urban development, and I don't know what I'll learn, but I'm excited.
Okay, it's a great it's a great blog to follow. They have some really good information. Anybody have concerns with that? Are you okay going forward with?
I will only approve it with one condition.
Okay.
That when he returns, he shares with us a synopsis of what he learned.
Totally.
So we can
I'm sorry, I just assumed that was going to happen.
All I care about is that he just Instagrams his trip.
I'll do that too. In fact, Molly Robinson from planning was a member of this a couple years back, as was Eric Shaw, the former CED director.
Okay, I don't think there's a problem. I think we are go with that. Thank you, Derek. I think we're done, aren't we? I shouldn't jump the gun. We are now adjourned. Thank you. Thank you all.